All right, it's a new week here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You know that already. You know the website is right below, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. You know all the things. Just kicked something under the desk. Wasn't really sure what it was. Still not entirely sure, but it's out of the way. You know all the things we ask you to do here on a regular basis. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Do that and you can stay up to date with all of our Pitt video content, these Morning Pitt videos that we put out every day of the week, Monday through Friday. Post-game press conferences and post-practice press conferences and practice highlight videos. And then our weekly live show on Wednesday nights. The Panther-Lair show here every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You want to make sure you don't miss any of that stuff. Click the subscribe button and stay up to date. Keep up with everything we do right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. As we always say, you can turn on notifications so you get an alert every time we post something new here or go live at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You don't want to miss any of it. Of course, you don't want to miss any of the Pitt coverage at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Football, basketball, recruiting, everything is covered there. And, of course, message boards where you can talk to other Pitt fans about everything going on. Panther-Lair.com. And there was a lot that happened over the weekend, a lot that happened in the past few days. So we figured it was a time to take a few minutes and talk about what's been going on and what's been happening over the last few days. Do a little Monday morning headlines for you. And, I had 3 or 4 different things I wanted to talk about here. And I was kind of debating which order to go in and which way. Should we do it this way? Should we go that way? And I think the way to do it is... we'll start with the not so good, because there was some negative, some not so good news that came out on Friday, I think it was, that the news came out. Quentin Martin committed to Penn State, and we'll just start there. We might as well rip the Band-Aid off, get it out of the way, and move on. We talk about it because he's a local prospect. The number one prospect in the state of Pennsylvania, certainly the number one prospect in the Western Pennsylvania. One of the top overall prospects on Pitt's board as far as guys that they were realistically pursuing and a realistic chance of landing. He's a 4-star athlete out of Bell Vernon, a guy who can really do anything, play a lot of different positions. Probably running back was the primary position. I've heard a lot of comparisons to Doran Dickerson in terms of positional versatility. Not necessarily, I don't know if he's quite the athlete that Doran was, but that's only because nobody's quite the athlete that Doran was. Doran was unique, they don't make many Dorans, but Quentin Martin's a pretty unique guy himself. And I think in terms of his position versatility, he probably compared somewhat to Doran, that he could be a running back, could be a big receiver, could even play on defense, could play outside linebacker, possibly even safety. I really like the idea of him playing where Doran ended up as like a tight end H-back, a guy who could move around, get and exploit mismatches in the passing game. But running back seems like where he's going to start out at Penn State. I think it's where the Pitt coaches would have, intended to start him out. And he was a top priority. There's no question about that. This isn't one we're going to pretend like they weren't really after him or they weren't really trying that hard or Pitt backed off or Pitt was, he wasn't a take or anything like that. He's a top priority. And there was a lot of time invested in trying to recruit him. There were a lot of resources invested in trying to recruit him and a lot of effort and a lot of hope placed in trying to recruit him. And the interest there was genuine. The interest was sincere that Quentin Martin was interested in Pitt. He was at Pitt's first spring practice last month. He came down and watched the practice. He was at a game last year. He was at the West Virginia game last year. He was at the Clemson game the year before. Spent some time with LaShawn McCoy at that game, and McCoy was certainly doing a great job selling Pitt to Quentin Martin. I think he was genuinely interested, and I think Pitt did just about everything they could to be competitive in that recruitment and give themselves a real chance, and I think they made a good amount of progress. But ultimately, it wasn't enough to win that battle against Penn State. And, I think you can look at a lot of different factors. You can ask, was it NIL? Is it attendance? Is it this? Is it that? And it's probably a lot of different things. And I would guess that there were probably some things about Pitt that Quentin Martin liked better than Penn State. But overall, the broad appeal, the broad attraction of Penn State won out. as it often does. I mean, let's call it what it is. You know, they lost Anthony Specca to Penn State. They've lost plenty of guys in the past to Penn State, and it's unfortunate. You know, I mean, it's never fun when Pitt loses a guy, particularly someone local, someone that they're heavily invested in or highly pursuing or seem to have a good chance with, and they end up losing him to Penn State. That always stings just a little bit more. And I think we can be honest about that, and we can be honest about the fact that it happens quite a bit. You know, I mean, realistically, it happens quite a bit. Tamir Robinson last year, Specca and Martin this year. I don't even need to name names because you know that it happens kind of regularly. Every now and then you'll have that year where Pitt wins more than it loses in terms of local guys in those head-to-head battles with Penn State. Deion Hayes the one year, and then the next year with Nakai Johnson and Elliott Donald. Dorian Ford, I think, to some extent was still a Penn State target. So they had a little bit of a run there, particularly with defensive line prospects. But on the whole, you tend to not win as many of those battles. Now, I think what we've seen is Pitt tends to, you know, where Pitt has won battles against Penn State in recruiting is out of the area for whatever reason. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, I think there are a lot of reasons we've talked a lot about over the years of why Pitt sometimes doesn't seem to recruit as well locally as they do outside the area. There's something to be said for almost being too close to the program and being too close to sort of the perception of the program. And I think that perception has changed in the last 2 years with the success that Pitt has had, but it still has a long way to go. And, you know, I think we talked about this probably last week when we were talking about momentum and why Pitt has so much momentum and why they were recruiting so well in the early going of this 2024 recruiting class. And the one thing I talked about was that, you know, what you can sell is 20 wins over the last 2 years in the ACC championship 2 years ago and finishing last season on a 5-game winning streak and winning the Sun Bowl and beating UCLA. You can sell all those things without getting into the, you know, some of the more unseemly details, the details that you and I focus on a lot and people around here might focus on a lot, like the Georgia Tech game or the Louisville game, or how Pitt had an opportunity to be even better than they were. And let's also be honest that while the last 2 years have been pretty great for Pitt, you know, the 8-5 season in 2019, the 6-5 season in 2020, even the 7-7 in 2018, not to mention the 5-7 in 2017, and 8-5 the 2 years before that, which was an improvement over the previous year's 6-7, and then 7-6, and 6-7, and 6-7. I mean, you know, and 8-5 before that. I mean, you have to go a long way to find that last 10-win season prior to 2021. All those 6s and 8s don't always add up to landing the 5s and the 4s. And I think when you're recruiting out of state, when you're recruiting Jordan Bass, you know, or you're recruiting Day Farmer, or even at the other side of the state when you're recruiting Jasir Whittington, and you're recruiting some of the guys that they've gotten in the last two classes, either this 2023 recruiting class that's coming in as freshmen right now, or the 2024 recruiting class who's, you know, finishing up their junior years of high school right now, you can focus on what you want to focus on. They're not close enough to maybe know all of that background or have that context in that history. You think about kids who are, you know, let's say someone like Quentin Martin or Anthony Specca right now, and I'm not saying this is entirely the case with these guys, but let's just use them as examples. They're finishing up their junior years of high school, right? So they're a junior in high school in the spring of 2023, right? So let's roll the clock back 5 years, 2018. Okay, the spring of 2018, they are in 6th grade, going into 7th grade. The fall of their 7th grade year, Pitt goes 7-7. They win the Coastal Division, but they go 7-7, right? The previous fall, when they were in 6th grade, Pitt went 5-7. This is what these kids grew up knowing. You know what I mean? When they're in 8th grade, Pitt went, 8-5. with some bad home losses, and they barely squeaked out a win against Eastern Michigan. When they were in ninth grade, Pitt went 6-5 on a COVID-shortened season. Now, they do have more recent memories of an ACC championship and the big game against Clemson and the win over West Virginia, and those are good memories, but you have to understand how some of this perception is baked in. And I think it does make it more challenging for Pitt with local kids because that they have that baked-in perception, and if they don't, there will never, and this is something that it'll be hard for Pitt to ever get away from. But even if the recruits, the players, the young men don't have that perception baked in, there will never be a shortage of players, there will never be a shortage of people around the high-profile prospects who will very quickly and without prompting remind them of what those years were like. If ever there's a recruit, a prominent kid who's coming up, and he's thinking about Pitt because they've had some recent success, believe me, there will be people around them telling them, well, yeah, but I mean, they barely beat Eastern Michigan that year. You want to go to a team that does that? You want to go to a team that loses the Youngstown State, loses the Bowling Green? I'm not exaggerating about this. And so, and again, I don't mean to say that, that's what happened with Quentin Martin. That's what happened with Anthony Specca. Anthony Specca was a lifelong Pitt fan. He saw all those games. He's got that, context and frame of reference. And I'm not saying that necessarily about Quentin Martin, but believe me that there are lots and lots of people in Western Pennsylvania who will not hesitate to dump on the local school when the opportunity presents itself with a high-profile local recruit and a high-profile local prospect. And that's unfortunate, but it's something that Pitt has to fight against. And the only way to really fight against it is just keep winning. You know what I mean? Keep winning 9, 10, 11 games a year. And that's really what the aspiration should be. Now, there's that whole sort of ongoing circle of, well, you need to get the good players to win. You need to win to get the good players. And, somewhere in there, you're going to have to just make a big jump on your own. And some would say that maybe over the last 2 years, Pitt made that big jump on their own, and they should be able to build on it. We'll see what 2023 brings. We'll see if they're able to do it consistently, because if they are, that's going to help shake some of that perception, some of that baked-in perception locally. And if they're not, if they stumble, if they fall back to 8 wins or 7 wins or something like that this year or next year, then it only reinforces that perception. And that's just the reality of it. It's just the reality. So Quentin Martin's gone. I don't know if, first of all, there aren't really make or break recruits in a class. I mean, a class is built of 20, 24 kids or however many kids. And there are a lot of things you need, but it's rarely about just one guy. And Quentin Martin wasn't that one guy. He would have been a huge piece for Pitt to land. But I think, even though they were probably in it more than a lot of people nationally would have given them credit for, I just don't. I think it was going to be a long shot. It was going to be a long shot. All right, a couple of guys that they are in good shape for have scheduled official visits for June. This started coming out over the weekend. Really, the premier name here of guys who have already scheduled visits, Sincere Edwards, a 4-star defensive end prospect from Florida. He actually goes to the same high school that Brandon Hill went to. He's verbally committed to Central Florida, but that is a loose commitment, I guess you would say. He visited Pitt earlier this month, and now he has locked in an official visit for June. And Pitt's got a great shot. He said after his unofficial visit, I think it was actually last week, said, quote, "My visit was amazing. I really loved how practice was. The practice was one of the best practices I've ever went to. The defense was really shut down. The coaching staff is very amazing. Coach Narduzzi is really a defensive guy anyway, and this is really a defensive school, which I like." So you really got a lot going here with this kid, with Sincere Edwards. He's a defensive line prospect, and so you've got the Charlie Partridge connection, which is huge. Obviously, I think any defensive prospect is going to take an extra look at Pitt, which is big. And then he's actually been on campus and seen it. And this was something I know I talked about last week, that when you get these guys on campus, your chances increase so significantly because of what the experience of actually being at Pitt and being in Pittsburgh is like compared to what the perception or expectation is. And so that was huge for Pitt to get Edwards on campus for an unofficial visit. Now he'll come back in June, and I think he's one of those guys you'll circle heading into June as, boy, that would be a huge get if they could. I mean, a 4-star defensive line prospect. This is a chance for Charlie Partridge to really bring in some stars after, establishing himself as one of the best defensive line coaches in the country. So that's a big one. Other ones that are locked in, Francis Brew, the defensive tackle commitment. He's going to be taking his official visit, I think, if not the first weekend in June, like right around there. It might be the first visit weekend that they do. And then Davin Bruton, an athlete prospect from New Jersey. Pitt offered him last fall. He came to a game last fall. And he came to a game, and I forget, they offered him, I think they offered him before he came to a game. He projects as an inside linebacker, a middle linebacker. He's about 6 foot, 6'1", 205, 210 pounds, somewhere around there, out of Red Bank Catholic in New Jersey. He's locked in an official visit for the same weekend as Sincere Edwards, actually, the final or next to last weekend in June, probably the last weekend that Pitt has official visits. So that'll be another one, as you look at Pitt trying to fill out this recruiting class. I think linebacker is a spot that they haven't really addressed yet with anybody in the class so far. They've got, a DB. They've got 4 defensive linemen, which is the other interesting thing about that Sincere Edwards kid, the 4-star, is, they're starting to, I think, be a little more selective with their defensive line recruits going forward, just because they've already got 4 committed. They can't really push those numbers too far. But a guy like Edwards is absolutely still a take, and definitely someone that they would bring in if they can get a commitment from him. They would take it. So that's going to be a big one to watch. Davin Bruton is a big one to watch in June, and we'll see what additional names get added as time goes on. I think over the next few weeks, you'll see those official visit lists starting to fill up, and June will shape up to be pretty exciting once again. All right, speaking of official visits and visits, recruits visiting campus or transfers visiting campus, the Pitt basketball team had one on campus this past weekend. And I forget if we talked about it much last week on the Morning Pitt. I know I wrote about it a little bit in the 321 column on Friday. And certainly we've been talking about it on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Zach Austin, a wing from High Point, was here for a visit. And Austin is, the word I keep using is interesting. He's just a really interesting guy. He's a 6'7" wing, could play like a 3, basically. 3 and 4 are kind of interchangeable in Pitt's offense. So he could sort of, put him on the court next to Blake Hinson, and they would sort of both be playing kind of the same spot. But he would, I think you could call him a 3. So he was a freshman in 2020, 2021. He redshirted, played the last 2 years. 2 years ago, 21-22, he led High Point in 3-point shots. He shot like 32% from the floor, but he made 67, which is more than anybody else on the team. And he led him in rebounding also. He averaged 8 rebounds per game, and was like the team's second leading scorer. Now this past year, it was still the team's second leading scorer. I had his score. Averaged 14 points per game. His rebounding dropped to 5.4 rebounds per game, and he wasn't the team's leading rebounder, but he was still, in the top 2. And then he was second on the team in 3-pointers made, shot a little bit of a better percentage. He's not as good of a shooter as Greg Elliott and probably Nike Sabandi, but he's explosive. He's bigger than either one of those guys at 6'7", and he's a guy who I think has a lot of pop. I've heard him described as a freak athlete, and he's a guy who I think if you put him on this team's roster, he just as it's coming together for next season. We understand that we don't know what the whole roster looks like yet, and we're not gonna know for a while. But if you put him with the rest of the roster that sort of exists now, the 3 incoming freshmen and the guys that they have returning, you put him there and you sort of fit him into a mix there around like the 3. It's an element that this past season's team didn't really have. They didn't have a guy like him. Nate Santos might be the closest comparison, but this guy is way more athletic and explosive than Nate Santos. He can make a lot happen, and I think it's pretty exciting to see the prospect of Zach Austin choosing Pitt as a transfer location. Everything we've heard is that the visit went really well, and Pitt has a really good shot at landing him, and I think it would be a big land for Pitt and a great start for Pitt's efforts in the transfer portal. I think they're being, I don't want to say selective, because I feel like when you say, oh, the coaching staff is being very selective with who they go after, even if it's accurate or it's true, it carries an air of, I don't know, acting like other schools are just taking anybody they can get their hands on. Or if you say, well, they're being very selective this year, that means last year they just took anybody that they could grab. And I don't think that was entirely the case. But I do think they're being very careful and considerate about who they bring in. I think they learned a lot about team chemistry last season and making sure you have not just the guys who fit on the court, but the guys who are a good fit with the culture of the team. I think the challenge is going to be replacing the culture that you lost with Jamarius Burton and Nelly Cummings. You can find good players. You need to find good teammates, good guys, because that was such a big part, I think, of what helped last year's team succeed. And I think the coaches came out of it believing that if they found the right guys who had some talent, they could beat you and they could win a lot of games. That it wasn't just about the talent, though. They need to be the right guys. And so bringing Zach Austin in on this official visit, he's around the coaches, he's around the team, and you get a good feel for him of whether he's the right kind of fit to carry on that culture and be a part of it. Like I said, I think there's a great chance that they're going to land him. We'll see what happens, what other visits Austin might choose to take. There's no visits here until the end of the week. It's a recruiting dead period, and then you can take more visits again next weekend. I think Pitt will have more visits, more transfers that they bring in for visits. But Austin, though, I think looks like has a real strong chance of joining this roster. And I think if he does, I think he's going to be, I don't want to go so far as to say he's a game changer or a difference maker, but he's a different kind of guy than they've had. And he can rebound as a 6'7" wing. Like I say, he's willing to shoot, which I think is important. We talked a lot about that last year of guys, not just having guys who can make shots, but who are willing to shoot. That 2 years ago, not only was Pitt one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the ACC, they were at the bottom in terms of attempts. So not only did they not make many threes, but they didn't even try. And so there wasn't any threat. Well, I mean, Zach Austin might only shoot 32 or 33%, but he's going to try. I think he would shoot fewer threes for Pitt this coming season if the roster comes together the way the coaches hope it will. But it just, having those guys, having somebody like him who's going to shoot and be a threat to score, I think in a number of ways, he could be an exciting addition to this roster. He really could. And there was another addition, of course, to the Peterson Event Center roster late last week on Friday. It was announced Tori Verdi, the UMass coach, is taking over Pitt's women's basketball program. Verdi knows Heather Like, Pitt Athletic Director of Athletics, Heather Like from Eastern Michigan. They overlapped for a couple of years, and I think about 3 years, and Verdi made the women's NIT twice at Eastern Michigan. At UMass, he's the last couple of seasons, he's been really successful. Won the A-10 regular season, won the A-10 conference tournament, took the Minute Women, and they apparently still call themselves the Minute Women. They should just change it to like the Minutes. It doesn't need to be the UMass Minutemen or Minute Women, just the Minutes, But took the Minute Women to the NCAA tournament 2 years ago, the program's first NCAA tournament appearance since 1998. This past year, they went 26-6, won the A-10 regular season title, went 14-2 in the conference, and now he's coming to Pitt, where Pitt has not been very good. Lance White won like 11 ACC games over 5 seasons, and never really did a lot. Didn't have a lot of success. And, to be honest, Tori Verdi, he's taken over a challenge. This program is a challenge. It's been hard to win here. Agnes Baronato had a couple of good years. Not much beyond that. Best of luck to him. I mean, I think he'll have the full support of the athletic department and the administration. But this has been a tough place to build. I think the resources will be there. I think the support will be there. It's just going to be convincing good players to come to Pitt and convincing the best players to come to Pitt and then coaching them well. And that's why he's going to get paid the big bucks, right? But new Pitt women's coach, so that job is filled. I guess they still need a gymnastics coach and anything else that might come open this off season or over the next few months. But that was a big one to fill. It looks like, as we sit here on April 10th, it looks like football's in a good place and men's basketball is in a good place. Obviously, we know about volleyball and the 2 soccer programs and wrestling. But after football and men's basketball, you'd like to get the women's basketball program on its feet because it hasn't been on its feet for a long, long time. Maybe Tori Verdi is the guy to do it. But either way, that's the headlines from the weekend. That's everything sort of catching you up on everything you needed to know heading into this week. We appreciate you tuning in this morning. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We would very much appreciate that. And go check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks again for checking it out today. Hope you have a great Monday. And we'll be back again tomorrow for another Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.